It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com. You just contact me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, if you like our show, be sure and check out our archives you can find for free. Go to Spreaker.com, and there's a chat room, too, where you can join with other listeners and complain and comment on the show. If you go to Spreaker, by the way, too, you can find a couple of shows I've done recently with Arturo Tafoya about the QAnon conspiracy. He runs this website called Conspiracy Distillery, and I did 2 episodes with him, and he put me in touch with today's guest, Professor Laura Dilley. And she's written this peer-reviewed piece. Okay, she's a college professor. And she's written this peer-reviewed piece called QAnon Propaganda on Twitter as Information Warfare, Influencers, and Networks and Narratives, where she really gets into the whole, what I believe is Twitter's complicity in this promoting this QAnon disinformation. So, Professor Laura Dilley, are you there?
I am. Hello. Good morning.
Yes, thank you so much. I know I had to postpone with you. You've been so patient with me, so I really appreciate your patience.
No problem.
Tell the audience, who is Professor Laura Dilley?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. I am an academic researcher and tenured professor at Michigan State University, where I've been for over 10 years. I've been successful in my career by many metrics. I have brought in a number of federal grants from NIH and NSF on my main research line, which has been speech, language, and neurocognition. In March of 2020, when COVID hit, I, like most people, was casting about for what is going on in the world, what has happened with, such that we're in this pandemic situation. I was really paying a lot of attention to the news, and I was getting more active on Twitter. I, since getting tenure, have really leaned in to try to make my voice heard and, seize those, or step into those First Amendment rights that we all hold so dear. And I was seeing a ton of disinformation on Twitter. Around the same time, I had a reach out from someone who is an activist who invited me to be a part of a group on Wire, which is a secure platform to coordinate around studying disinformation as well as extremism. So that was an interesting opportunity, and given the times that we were in, I went in and I started learning from lots of folks that I came into contact with, activists, journalists, various folks who have studied extremism and disinformation for many, many years. And in the group, I found a lot of like-minded folks that were wanting to call out the disinformation, try to understand its sources, try to understand the forces that are shaping our society that are pushing people toward extreme views and polarization. And I was really getting my feet wet in that environment. And some of the folks I didn't end up gelling with, and some, as far as, finding my own way. Eventually those wire rooms, evaporated. I ended up starting my own project, and the way things evolved, it involved finding this crazy conspiracy. I'm not even going to use the word theory. I'm going to use the word fantasy, conspiracy fantasy of QAnon, which is a narrative that many of your listeners may have heard of, that involves Democrats, liberals, and elites supposedly being part of a cabal that rules the world and is involved in promoting child sex trafficking, cannibalism, and other crazy ideas. And when I saw these narratives on Twitter, I was horrified, and it really made me question, well, who is putting out this disinformation? How did this come to be here? How is it being spread? And that was a motivating factor for me. While everything else was going on, while academia and teaching were sort of transitioning to being all online and so forth, I really dove into this topic. In addition to making sure that my everything was secure on the home front, but just really trying to chase influencers online and behind the scenes that might be spreading the QAnon disinformation. Eventually, that turned into the research publication that you alluded to in your intro.
Professor Laura Dilley, in her modesty, failed to mention that she's a graduate of MIT and Harvard, okay? And now is a professor at Cornell.
That would be Michigan State.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, but
Not
Cornell. Okay, but the thing is, this is a really elaborate, professional, well-researched paper here, this QAnon propaganda on Twitter as information warfare, influencers, and networks. How did you fund all this?
This was through my own professional development money. Every year we get some, a certain small amount of funds to either go to conferences or maybe buy some computer equipment. I chose to pay for a computer programmer to help me pull some data, but the research and the work is my own.
Incredible. Now, since you've published this, have you been contacted by the Department of Justice or FBI or anybody saying, hey, you don't want to take a look at this?
It's interesting because I didn't expect the reaction that this paper got. I certainly poured my heart into it, put hundreds of hours, I would say, into it all told. And I was hoping that it would make an impact, but you never know. And when it did come out, it's interesting the set of reactions I got. On the one hand, this paper has been retweeted about 1,200 times, which is unheard of for an academic paper. Certainly the most attention I've ever gotten to any of my 80 plus publications. As far as FBI, and so forth, or Homeland Security, I have had some indications that the paper's been passed along to those law enforcement agencies. Even in the German Bundestag, actually, I was told this had been circulated. So it has had a worldwide impact now, and Russia was not too happy about that, I'll say.
And how do you know that?
Well, it's interesting. I had a communication, from a national security official who said this paper punched Putin in the nose. And quite honestly, it surprised me how what happened after I gave my first public talk on this research. I had been holding back on publicly announcing the work, recognizing that it was going to be controversial. I did let my dean of my college and my chair know that I had done this work. They were in support. I gave the first public talk at the Michigan State University Center for Interdisciplinarity on October 15th, 2021, and that was one day after I had sent the proofs for the paper back to the journal, which basically means it's gone through the entire peer review process. It was accepted with praise by the reviewers, then turned over to journal production. They typeset it all and they send it to the author to do the little copy editing if there are any typos and that kind of thing. So I had just sent the paper back the day before, gave my first public talk. It was uploaded to the internet, and within 48 hours, I had a high-flying public relations official who has worked with WikiLeaks and constantly tweets Russian propaganda and disinformation out, threatened a lawsuit to me. A day later, I had a person who was affiliated, who had a Yale EDU address, reach out to me and request a copy of the paper. Thinking that they were an academic, I went ahead and sent that paper along. Since it was all but published. That person 6 hours later wrote back and said, I've been scanning through your CV, your resume here, and I see that a few years ago you wrote a proposal to the CIA for some money. Do you mind sending that along to me? And I said to myself, well, that seems weird. I'm going to decline that. And I said, no, that's okay. And so it was for, by the way, speech perception experiments. A postdoc had found this announcement. So anyway, I'd never gotten any money from the CIA. That was a declined proposal. At any rate, a few hours later, that person wrote back to me and revealed that they work for a blockchain social media personality out of Moscow, Russia, and that they were very displeased with this paper. They felt that I was defaming them. They alternated between saying, this is terrible, and appealing to pathos by saying, oh, we had someone at our nonprofit here who passed away recently. How can you possibly, be publishing this when they just recently passed? So it was kind of a strange reveal. And they, I knew the paper was in publication. I said to myself, well, this is really strange. I'm getting harassed now by people that are affiliated with, oh, by the way, the names were Susie Dawson, is the Moscow-based media personality who runs an organization called Panquake. Sean O'Brien, whose apparently main job is not with Yale, but with her organization as the CTO, if I recall correctly. And then Trevor Fitzgibbon is the PR personality who also was not displeased, the one who tweets Russian propaganda. So those three individuals coordinated then in some manner. I'm not full, I haven't seen all of what they did because a lot of it was behind the scenes. But the Sean O'Brien guy that was had the kind of adjunct position at Yale was in touch with Trevor Fitzgibbon because Trevor Fitzgibbon tweeted about this supposed CIA proposal that I had written some number of years ago to try and get money to do speech perception experiments, which is the only attempt I'd ever made to engage with that agency. So as far as what happened then, the three of them and a wider group of trolls harassed me on Twitter, memed me. This included DeFango, Thomas Schoenberger, and a whole group of trolls and ne'er-do-wells, you could say, that were harassing me online, while at the same time they started emailing the journal editors saying, oh, they were being defamed. And truth be told, I did pull data from Trevor Fitzgibbon's Twitter account as well as Susie Dawson's Twitter account, and they're not named anywhere in the paper. Their public Twitter handles did appear in an appendix to the paper, but one has to ask, why do they care so much to not have any information about potential involvement in this QAnon promotion on Twitter and off in public discussion? What happened then is they continued to email the journal editors, including the CEO of the entire Frontiers series. Frontiers is a really prestigious, well-known journal publishing company that has all kinds of specialty journals all over the world, and Frontiers in Communication being one of them. Eventually, I think the editors got skittish that they might be sued, and they declined to publish the paper. They refunded my money. And then I was out of luck. It's like that's unheard of, completely unprecedented to have a paper that's been peer-reviewed, accepted, and in press come under attack like that. In spite of, and I'll also just say, in kind of closing in this thread, I got in touch with Union of Concerned Scientists saying, hey, academic peer-reviewed research, it's been accepted with praise and in press that this journal is coming under attack by these apparently Russian-affiliated propagandists. By the way, that propaganda campaign escalated to appearances by Sean O'Brien and Susie Dawson on actual RT Media, which is the Russia Today network, to try and discredit this work. So that all happened. Union of Concerned Scientists supported the research and wrote a letter of support. Several extremism researchers, who had come under attack by the similar network, wrote in support. And a nonprofit called Undue Influence Watch also issued their support. In spite of that, the paper was unaccepted. What happened next was I had been in touch with a reporter at Business Insider, and Business Insider published an article that featured the research, and this was just a month after the paper had been unaccepted at the Frontiers Journal series. Quite unprecedented in any, to have research come under attack and be suppressed like that. Nevertheless, Business Insider published a piece about how Twitter had an insufficient response to QAnon. So the paper, was suppressed in December of 2021. The Business Insider article talking about Twitter's response to QAnon came out on January 6, 2022. And of course, yesterday, here we are, it was January 6, 2023. In between that, I also, and thank you for hearing out this saga, because it's quite involved, but I went ahead and uploaded the paper to ARXIV, which is an academic article sharing site where research is put out that may be under review, or it may have been accepted for publication and be peer reviewed. My research falls into the latter category. So this academic sharing site in July of 2022, and that sparked a fresh spate of trolling, even escalating to this individual, Thomas Schoenberger, who I mentioned, who's also featured in the paper, coordinating to launch we may have to come back to me to this point for me to unpack it, but there's one of the things the paper shows is close coordination among the far right, some New Age folks, and some folks that are accounts that are interested in, we could say, alternate reality games, which are maybe a form or to some degree related to the idea of LARPing or live action role play. So a lot of coordination among those constituents in promoting QAnon on Twitter. And one might ask, well, how and why? And that's another set of issues to tackle in the remainder of our article. But to try and complete this thought, following my release of the paper on ARXIV, the academic sharing site in July 2022, I had a fresh set of attacks among Russian-affiliated individuals as well as trolls, including this Thomas Schoenberger guy who's been featured in several QAnon documentaries for his actual or possible role in the promotion and beginnings of spreading QAnon as an urban myth or modern day conspiracy fantasy. And he coordinated to put out a clue to maybe the most well-known, I would say, probably alternate reality game, which is an internet puzzle presently, whether it is or not, I think, but it's called Cicada 3301, something that the individual Arturo Tafoya that you alluded to as well in your intro knows quite well, because he was recruited into Cicada, which appears to in fact be something like a radicalization pipeline where folks that are potentially susceptible to being radicalized in one direction or another could be would be in an internet environment interacting with folks that might just do that. So he issued us Thomas Schoenberger, again, the guy who's been interviewed in many documentaries for his potential or actual role in QAnon, coordinated to issue a puzzle clue for the Cicada 3301 puzzle that said, find Professor Dilley of MSU for a clue to our next puzzle. May not be the exact words, but it's that, naming me and incentivizing people all over the world to find me, track me, potentially stalk me, threaten me, harass me. It was that in September of this past year that led me to go to the police and report that I was being targeted by a well-known internet puzzle. By the way, when I say well-known, I do mean well-known with this internet puzzle. In 2015, Rolling Stone wrote an article about that puzzle, and that was 8 years ago now, roughly. And yeah, so I'm the only person, to my knowledge, who's ever been personally targeted in a puzzle clue for this internet puzzle. And that's kind of brings us up more or less to today.
Oh my God. How did we get to a point in the world, in the country, where people with these fake made up names like Defango and all this, how does they get this kind of notoriety, but Russian funding? How did we get here?
How did we get here, indeed? That is the question. And I think that it's a really important question, because so far, a lot of the media analysis of how this QAnon conspiracy fantasy got started has remained at a surface level or involved fairly, fairly maybe oversimplistic consideration of, oh, people were just on COVID, they just got interested, they wanted something to do, and they found this stuff online and they got really on board with trust the plan. No, that's not, in fact, what happened if you trace it back. And that's where, in these past, the paper took me a certain distance in understanding QAnon, and I was able to gain a lot of information from social media and understanding, some of the influencers, first of all, both online and offline, that are pushing these narratives, actively pushing them, as well as some of the groups or narratives that are being interwoven, such as far right, extremist, white supremacist, New Age, including the so-called I am cult. That's a buzzword. Keep that in mind. And also alternate reality games, all of those narratives being threaded in. But I still had a lot of learning to do. And so in the past 2 years, my understanding of this has come along quite a bit, to where I'm now looking back in time at what was going on in the media space around 2016, 2017, when the very first Q post was made on October 28, 2017. There was a lot going on that I think will be the topic of scholars and historians study and debate for years to come.
Well, but give us an idea then, in hindsight, what was going on?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And, a lot of these things have been mentioned by people, commentators such as QAnon Anonymous and Mike Rothschild and other folks. But what those perspectives have failed to take full account of is how there were a lot of attempts to influence folks in the media at that time. YouTubers, radio personalities, to try and get them to put out certain narratives, things like, oh, Hillary Clinton is going to be arrested, and hyping up certain outlets that, in retrospect, makes more sense why they might have been hyped, including hyping up the Cicada 3301 puzzle. So if you look back at many of the media clips from prominent YouTubers at that time, such as Nathan Stoltman of Lift the Veil, being one I'll just throw out, he, and there's also Ed from Outer Dark, they were hyping the Cicada 3301 puzzle around the same time they started promoting QAnon. One has to ask, why was Cicada 3301 being discussed in that time? It appears, by my read now, based on everything I've seen, that Cicada 3301 as an entity, as a nebulous entity that we could kind of try to define the boundaries of in further conversation, but it was positioned to be hyped as an outlet from WikiLeaks, that somehow Cicada 3301 was in the space and in good with WikiLeaks and was getting some of the information from WikiLeaks, or so the narratives went, such that when other information was put in and conveyed through these mechanisms having to do with Cicada 3301, like, oh, Hillary Clinton's going to be arrested. Oh, Donald Trump is fighting a pedophile network that's headed out of, Comet Ping Pong Pizza Parlor. Those kinds of disinformation narratives. The pipelines were primed. The pumps were primed to send along those narratives as well, because they had been legitimized through associations with WikiLeaks is basically my read on it.
I would encourage the audience to go look in the archives. I've interviewed Mike Rothschild about this very topic, and also Nathan Stoltman. I've been on his show. He's been on my show.
Wow.
I know. I told you, I know all these characters.
Amazing.
It's a small world. It is a small world.
Which is maybe why, just maybe why you can see how some coordinated or concerted efforts to influence a few people could go a long way.
Yes, and I've noticed a pattern of very suspicious activity behind the scenes of people who seem to be at war with each other, are actually friendly with each other, and there's money passing back and forth and donation money going back and forth, all kinds of bizarre stuff. People, for a while, I had this a media company contacting just about every guest that came on this show and offering them some kind of an NDA deal, a future production deal, if they would sign an NDA. And don't tell Ed Opperman about it, whatever you do. Okay? So I've been in the trenches here with these folks, you know. Now, what about, before we get into this incredible research work you've done here, which really focuses on the Twitter handles and who they influence and how quickly they rose. And you see this all the time, these nobodies who show up and suddenly they have 100,000 Twitter followers. Before we get to that, though, because you mentioned some of the positive attention you've got from Business Insider, what about unintended negative attention? Just having your name associated with the word QAnon. It'll get your YouTube channel shut down. It'll get your YouTube video removed. Have you experienced any unintended censorship or negative attention besides the trolling from these actual people involved?
Well, it's hard to gauge what Twitter's algorithms may be doing behind the scenes. Any media that has had any posts that have to do with QAnon, there's some reason to think that they're being suppressed, which was perhaps Twitter's attempt at some level early on to try and suppress some of the disinformation. Clearly, they had a free-for-all attitude regarding QAnon propaganda for quite a long time, and it wasn't until after January 6, 2021, in the days after that insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, that Twitter started to crack down on QAnon on Twitter and did some mass suspensions. For me personally, it's been hard to see whether my posts are getting suppressed. Certainly I have an active little troll gang out there that's trying to meme me and other legitimate researchers by trying to associate me with various negative publicity that may have taken place at Michigan State and so forth. But personally, I've kept my head down as far as trying to pop it up for legitimate radio shows such as yours and other interview opportunities where I'd have a chance to really lay out the story. So that's kind of about the extent of it right now.
When I was reading your paper, you mentioned astroturfing. Can you explain what astroturfing is?
Sure. Astroturfing is the idea that individuals may put out political ideas under the guise of looking like they're grassroots and individuals acting alone. But when they're actually part of a coordinated campaign, that's what we call astroturfing. Now, digital astroturfing is basically that, but on steroids for the internet age, which is what I found evidence of in this research paper. You have all kinds of unnatural metrics, things that don't fit together, such as you said, an account that will pop up and suddenly, and it's a nobody anonymous account, and suddenly it's got 10,000 or 100,000 followers. So that's the kind of, those sorts of coordinated campaigns are going on prolifically on social media now, sometimes run by corporations or government entities. We don't know who's all fully behind QAnon, but there's certainly a lot of evidence to suggest that Russia is behind part of it. I also was watching Saudi Arabia and QAnon Saudi Arabia and QAnon UAE springing up with Arabic messaging in summer of 2020 with the Q symbol, which is, there's some pretty eye-catchy letter Qs in fire and this kind of thing. Why on earth would UAE and Saudi Arabia affiliated accounts in Arabic be promoting or spreading something that has to do with which is inherently a United States-based narrative about how Donald Trump's going to save the children? So it's these kinds of online dynamics that feed into digital astroturfing at scale. Being fed by all kinds of money sources that we'll be unpacking for years, I suspect.
The funding is amazing, and even people like Project Veritas, these people are swimming in money. Do you see do you see the same thing happening on the left, where there's this disinformation campaign and support coming from somewhere? Yeah,
I haven't seen a lot of coordination on the left, which is maybe a scary thing is that you might suspect that the left was planning these kind of ops as well. But from what I've seen, I haven't seen coordination. I think people just don't know what to do. It's said that the left can't meme that's the meme. I don't know about that, but I do think that that there's significantly less coordination to fight back against the right's clear coordination. So that's something to talk about further.
Right. So then is it possible then that there's an intelligence community involvement in promoting this, or capitalist oligarchs? You know what I'm saying?
I think one can try and look at the evidence first and do inductive reasoning about what are some of the major elements behind this campaign. I think I would say, based on the dynamics of what we know is happening in 2016, 2017, we know, well, first of all, we know that there was a lot of attention to potential Russian involvement in the election. And as far as, every country wants their power in the world. If we think that Russia wasn't doing anything, if they're completely innocent, I think that would be a naive perspective. There's certainly a lot of evidence consistent with Russian meddling and involvement. They were, there was a lot of attention to the Seth Rich narrative, which is the idea that, it wasn't Russia that stole the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton emails. It was, it was an insider, this Democratic guy who was in the Hillary Clinton campaign, who supposedly, he took the emails and he was a whistleblower. This is a whole thing. There was a book by Andy Kroll called A Death on W Street that I just got for Christmas. In fact, I'm looking forward to reading, but it really unpacks the involvement of to spread this Seth Rich narrative. What's interesting is many of the players who spread QAnon also spread Seth Rich. So the pipelines, again, being kind of primed and ready there. But as far as the groups that are involved, I think an inductive approach to, we know that there was a lot of corruption in the Trump administration. We know that Russia was involved. We know there was Saudi Arabia, in the background, UAE doing some deal making there. That would probably be the place to start. And then we also know corporates like, the folks that were the corporations that were involved in the Dakota Access Pipeline. I'd also steer any listeners to this incredible podcast series that has just been released called American PSYOP. I had nothing to do with that podcast, but I've only been listening, and it's the story of the son of NATO Commander Wes Clark, whose name is Wes Clark Jr., and his being subject to this incredible elaborate influence campaign at Standing Rock, in 2016. This was, of course, in the months and around the time of the Trump's election to U.S. president. So I really think there's value in kind of an inductive approach to looking at the groups that might have been behind some of these PSYOPs or information operations, information warfare, based on the evidence up till now.
I've been hearing that lately myself. I did the first show on Standing Rock, by the way. The word Standing Rock wasn't even in public use then at that point. But now you're saying that there was a PSYOP operation around Standing Rock amongst the activists.
That activists were being targeted. I would really recommend this podcast. It only started coming out just about a month ago, I believe, and the 9th and final episode was just released. So it's really telling, and provides some convergent facts and evidence regarding some of the folks that actually come up, whose names actually come up in understanding the origins of pushing the QAnon conspiracy fantasy, such as Sean Stone, right, who is the son of director Oliver Stone. Both of them are well affiliated with Russian media, such as RT Media. and have their own shows or have appeared on RT. Also, Sean Stone has been a big proponent of the so-called I Am movement or cult, which Thomas Schoenberger also has some connections to, as well as another influencer who ran the QAnon influence account, Snow White 7IM. That's Lisa Clapier, who also was involved in Standing Rock. So when you start looking at the connections among, and it makes sense too, because if you're going to grow up to be a professional propagandist and have a career in that, well, what are you going to do? Maybe you're going to, you're going to look for all the opportunities to have some impact or have those job opportunities. And if your job is to go out and basically persuade folks or trick them or influence them unduly, you're gonna be probably on the short list for opposite Standing Rock and QAnon and Seth Rich narrative. All of those, it starts to make some sense.
Yeah, we boy, there's so much. David Wilcock, does he come up in your research too as well?
He sure does. I pulled Twitter data on him for the research paper, and since then he is one that I've been looking at more closely. He is a New Age influencer associated with this big media network called Gaia.
Right.
Yeah, and so it appears that there was some effort to kind of persuade folks to change their beliefs and maybe to shift perhaps to the far right, while also I'm really not sure, but David Wilcock is one certainly that comes up in terms of intersections between QAnon promotion, psyops or influence campaigns, and New Age.
And he's another one who got his start through Kerry Cassidy.
Is that right?
She did the first interview with him, and also Mr. Sean Stone's personal dating life, dating Sarah Adams, who was the ex-fiancée of Max Spears, two other characters created by Kerry Cassidy.
No kidding.
Yes, and this whole bunch from Revolution Radio. The guy was an ex-FBI agent who ran ex-FBI informant who ran a station. These podcasters that come out of nowhere, all this stuff. We got to have you come back because we're so far into the show.
Wow.
We haven't touched on anything yet. 41 minutes in.
I'd be pleased to come back. Yeah, sure.
You're onto some stuff here. Now, so that's the magical thinking part, okay? Those characters. What is this I Am cult? Because our friend Arturo was talking about that too. Explain to me what the I Am cult is.
Yeah, Arturo Tafoya has done quite a bit of research on this. The I Am cult has had a number of iterations over time. It started out as an ideology being promoted back in the 1940s by a couple named Guy and Edna Ballard. And the Ballards were con artists, it's clear. They also had a far-right political orientation. They were all about trying to get the FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Eleanor Roosevelt out of the White House and wanted to themselves get into it, it seems. They would organize, religious-themed ceremonies where they had folks stand around in a group, supposedly according to a book on the matter, and chant, to blast their enemies from the face of the earth and put names into an urn or something like this. So that is the background. There's some connection then to the silver shirts. By the way, I also want to recommend Rachel Maddow's podcast Ultra, which talks about in the 1940s there were efforts around some of the folks that may have been involved with this early I Am cult by the Ballards to overthrow the U.S. government, and basically were German Nazi sympathizers working within U.S. government to try to overthrow it, which I found really interesting to learn about as a comparison for some of what's going on today in politics. But I Am continued and had various iterations. There's another person, woman named Elizabeth Clare Prophet.
Sure.
Yeah, who there's some amazing clips. Actually, in episode 9 of American PSYOP, they actually pulled a clip from Elizabeth Clare Prophet and General Michael Flynn, both saying a prayer. And it's incredible, the similarities, even the intonation of voice, really making it hard for General Michael Flynn to discount the claims of many researchers and media personalities on the ball that pointed out that there were influences in Michael Flynn's prayer that harken back to this I am personality, Elizabeth Clare Prophet. So that gives a bit of the outline.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet, that's the one that was dating Captain Steubing, right, from The Love Boat? Yeah, that is.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Huh.
Yeah, I just looked it up.
Okay.
Weren't they? He left his wife to go follow the cult, and then he left after a while. Yeah. I don't know if they were actually dating or not. I can't get into all the gossip there.
Yeah, they were. I don't know anything about that, but she was running, a religious group,
right.
A cult-like group that was very much isolationist out in Wyoming, I believe it was.
Oh boy! What about you mentioned too the occult? How does the occult fit into all this?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I've learned a lot about. I had no knowledge of the occult before studying extremism. One thing I did see in the data was a lot of promotion of what appeared to be kind of occult symbology. I'd have two answers to that. First of all, there are some far-right Nazi groups, neo-Nazi groups that do use the occult as part of their symbology and belief system. Also, some of the folks that on the short list of names that come up when talking about behind the scenes of who may have been spreading QAnon narratives to influencers early on, folks like Thomas Schoenberger and his close associate Frank Bacon, Tyrone Simpson is the real name, I believe. They have a cult-like mentality, or this idea that you can basically change reality by believing something or memeing it into existence, and this is a core belief of many chaos agents. So those are the two connections I would say. I did see connections to the occult in the data where I traced some of the folks that were promoting QAnon to far-right neo-Nazis, including some that did believe in the occult, and then some of the chaos agents that believe in occult magic to change reality.
Yeah, like even that frog meme, Pepe the Frog, is some type of occult thing, right?
I don't know. There's a documentary on that I haven't watched, but certainly the Pepe meme and Groyper memes took off as ways that actually did change reality, and even memed Trump into the presidency.
Yeah, I can forget his name, but I had that guy from Blondie on, who's an occultist himself, and he wrote that book about Trump and the occult, all the stuff around him too. I think his name is Lackford or something like that.
Lackman?
Yeah, right. Lackman. That's him. Yeah. People should go back and check that out too, because he gets into all that stuff about Pepe and the memes and all the stuff that went on around there too. What about Colonel Michael Aquino? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, just emphasizing that's a great read. I haven't read the whole book, but got a couple chapters into Dark Star Rising, I think it's
right. That's the one I had him on about, Dark Star Rising. But he's written many. He was a student of Crowley himself. Yeah, that whole bunch. I was down on the Lower East Side myself back in those days, so we had we know a lot of the same people. Colonel Michael Aquino, because one of his writing partners that wrote Mind War was a big Q proponent.
Yeah. So let me say what I know about Michael Aquino.
Yeah.
So he was high up in it was the Army, I believe. As an officer, he became a psyops expert and wrote a book with another Army. I would say general, but I'm not sure about their actual rank.
Yeah.
Named Paul Vallely.
Right.
So it was a psyops manual that became widely known, or has been discussed a lot in these circles. Michael Aquino also is known as promoting Satanism, a variant of it, and even going on various shows to talk about his beliefs. Of course, in a free society, we want to allow different points of view. So, as far as his connection to QAnon, well, we know that folks like Thomas Schoenberger and Sean Stone interviewed Michael Aquino and took great interest in him, said praiseworthy things about him. So there is an awareness clearly by many folks who are behind the scenes in, we know, having promoted QAnon, of sophisticated PSYOP tactics, and even the folks who wrote the manual.
Right. So then what do you make of all this?
Well, I think that's a question for the ages. As far as my own take on it, a lot of researchers are starting to look more at the I wouldn't say a lot. A number of us are starting to look back at the origins of QAnon and how it got started on various new media, including influencing folks on YouTube, on radio, and on Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. And you see a lot of convergences. So I think I personally think there's overwhelming amount of evidence to suggest now that QAnon did not just spring up spontaneously, that there were efforts made, certainly to promote it on social media, as you can see readily in my research paper on Twitter data, lots of inorganic activity there to do the digital astroturfing promotion. But what we also know, and this is what I've learned in the last 2 years, is that there's a tremendously sophisticated set of influence efforts going on in the space of influencers broadly to try and push these narratives in opportunistic ways. So the ways in which that all came together, I believe, will be the stuff of research and historian scrutiny for years to come.
Do we see this pattern right now going on right now today? I'm trying to search my mind. I can think of January 6th deniers. They say, well, it was an undercover FBI operation to discredit. Do we see the same kind of well-oiled machine in existence right now on any topics?
I think that we see a lot of the same dynamics even gaining steam because Elon Musk has let a lot of these accounts back on Twitter.
Right.
Twitter tried to do some measure of due diligence to deplatform and suspend accounts, but just last night, General Michael Flynn got his account back, and the last tweet was from prior to yesterday was from January 8th, 2021. So these folks are going to be out promoting their narratives. I'm hopeful that we can start to come together as a country, and on the right and the left to try and understand, how we've both been played, how both sides have been played toward pushing false narratives that would benefit a few powerful countries or corporations. I mean, that's a starting place anyway, to try and tease things apart and get more fine-grained about it. But there's been a lot of efforts to distract from important evidence and facts while serving up pure disinformation for public consumption. So I'm hopeful that we can begin to have productive conversations around how this took place and where we go from here.
Now, and like you said, it appears that YouTube and Twitter were complicit in this, okay, and endorsing, and getting all the hits, I guess, and monetizing these Pizzagate accounts and these QAnon accounts. But then suddenly one day they all turned, and now everything's so heavily censored. What do you think made that caused that change?
Well, I think that there's this issue of benign neglect, which comes from a legal scenario, which may apply to Twitter and YouTube's initial responses to disinformation. That, oh, well, First Amendment, protects speech, including disinformation. Well, letting it go on so far that it actually resulted in real-world political violence, including in places like Myanmar, where it's documented that Facebook contributed to genocide by its failure to deal with how its platform was being used to spread genocidal messaging. They haven't, these social media companies have not faced anywhere near the level of responsibility or punishment that they should have. Now we see that not only is Mark Zuckerberg is still in charge of Facebook, YouTube seems to be trying. Twitter is going in the wrong direction with Elon Musk letting many of these people that have actually promoted political violence back into its space. I don't know, but I do think that the advertising model that basically tries to get clicks and views and promote as the priority, that is pushing our society in the wrong direction. I hope we can change course.
We've gone way over time, okay? So I'm gonna have to beg you to come back, okay? In fact, I'm gonna be calling the police on me I'm gonna be stalking you to come back on the show. I'm the next one on your list there.
It'd be my pleasure.
But I got one more question for you, and I can't let it go. Have you noticed this thing recently? Because it's that same pattern of promotion. When Johnny Depp had that trial with Amber Heard, you saw all these Instagram clips and reels and TikToks with Johnny Depp swaggering into the courtroom. And then we saw Elon Musk, the same thing with this music in the background with all the wisdom coming from Musk. That guy, Paul Harvey it is, or from the Family Feud, you see him giving his wisdom. And Andrew Tate. This creation of Andrew Tate. And we see people in the comments, they're coming up with the most crazy right-wing conspiracies, and people in the comments are the same Q guys. Are you studying that?
I've had a few people putting a bug in my ear that there are some similarities going on with these trials. I haven't followed it closely, but what I would say is that it would be a pretty productive thing to do, certainly if I get started in looking at that, to consider the base hypothesis that some of the same actors may be involved in manipulating these public events like the Johnny Depp trial and promoting Andrew Tate, so forth, if I were to get started looking more closely.
We've been talking to Professor Laura Dilley. You can find her on Twitter at prof.Dilley, and that's at Laura_Greenaura, GREENAURA. It's the best way to find her. There's a Business Insider article you can look up. Check out, if you go to her profile on Twitter, you can find a link to this study that she's been talking about here, QAnon propaganda on Twitter as information warfare, influencers, networks, and narratives. Professor Laura Dilley, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to coming back.
Great. Thank you. Good night.